Okay, so chapter 20, image restored. We are really here in the home stretch, just three chapters left to go. Our second chapter in talking about the brain. And I would say this is definitely a transition from the concept of the organic or biomechanical brain into more of what we might refer to as the mind. Mind and brain, I would argue, are interrelated. They are inextricably linked, but they're not identically the same. And how that works, I would say, I don't know. And neither does anyone else. That's been the speculation of everyone who has considered what it means to be alive. And it is a mystery. I dare say perhaps a holy mystery that, as we will have the chance to review how this batch of chemicals allows us to experience life itself. And there is something that is just simply beyond our understanding or comprehension, and possibly that will always be beyond our comprehension or understanding. No matter how advanced our technology gets, perhaps there will always be a gap between what our brain is and what it means. So we have another one of those unusual chapters that doesn't start off with a little vignette or a personal anecdote or a story. But it's an interesting start. Rather than a story, he's kind of laying out this a few almost introductory questions or thoughts to make that transition between, again, last chapter was really about the brain. We talked anatomically quite a bit. We talked about, how the synapses fire and this interconnected superhighway and tapestry through the nervous system of almost every cell in the body to the brain. And now we're shifting. He talks about the processing 5 trillion chemical operations every second. And then he starts talking about awareness. Now, I think that's actually kind of an interesting concept. There are whole metaphysics that are about establishing the notion of self, what it means to understand that you are you. And sort of fundamental to all of those are awareness and sensation. Now, in that metaphysical framework, we would talk about the concept of self-awareness. That we as humans, it's kind of one of the philosophical distinctions between humanity and, say, animals. Or we've talked about this before, like artificial intelligence. When is artificial intelligence a super sophisticated program, and when is it something more? And science fiction writers have, wondered about this for a long time and written lots of stories. And oftentimes, one of the tests, I believe this is in Isaac Asimov's Rules for Robotics, where self-awareness is one of the linchpins. It's one of the keys to being something more than an animal or something more than a machine. When you know that you are you. So how that applies and how we understand that is going to always be connected to our senses in one way or another. And so he's talking about all this information that's being processed by our brain and the stuff we're most aware of. So like right now, what are the things that you're most aware of? What can you feel or sense? that seems the most clear? Anybody? Presence.
Being here.
So you're in this room and not in another room, or you're in your car, or you're in the shower. I'm feeling my bottom in my seat because I'm going to have to shift in just a second. My eyes are noticing that everybody here except for Mary Lou is wearing green. So she's getting pinched at some point. I'm a little hungry. What else? What else do we have?
The pages under my fingers.
Pages under your, because you got the book and you're kind of working it.
And hearing,
because this is how we're interacting. Like, Pat is actually just a bunch of electrons to us. You know, the phosphorescence of this computer screen and a pair of speakers. And if I turn on the speakers and I turn off the monitor, it's like Pat sort of ceases to exist, except obviously she doesn't. But we've got this almost pretty natural conversation going on where we can hear each other and see each other, but it's all kind of an artificial construct at some level. So beyond those major senses, like the taste, touch, smell, and all that kind of stuff, he then begins to remind us of some of these other senses that the brain is constantly monitoring and maybe even in some degree of control. What's some of the stuff he mentions? Well, I'm still kind of in that first paragraph. So for instance, when we think about the five senses or the major senses, there's actually a bunch of senses that are much more minor. We don't tend to pay any attention. But for instance, it's not just the sensation of touch. Even when your eyes are closed, you can tell when you're right side up or upside down. How?
For instance,
you put it either flat or either flat.
Okay. Well, for instance, I've got one of those what do they call it? An inversion table at home. And so you can be flat, you can be slightly forward, or you can be slightly pitched back, and your body can perceive. And it's not just the touch of like, oh, my hair is, being pulled by gravity. For one thing, that's what those little bones in the inner ear are doing, and the little bubbles of air in there. It's like almost like a level in like for construction. You can tell if the structure level. We can perceive orientation.
Not just balance. There's more.
Yeah, there's something kind of hard to describe about it, but we still know it's true.
Well, like you're upside down. The blood flows to your head?
Sure.
You certainly can recognize that
Right.
sensation.
Yeah, but why? Why would, again, it's...
Because it's not, quote, normal, unquote.
Sure. But it takes a step for us to realize that our body is built in such a way that gravity pulling blood more towards our head elicits a sensation that we perceive.
Right.
There's no reason for that except that it does. Now we can say, well, that's because it's dangerous for us and it's some kind of biomechanical advantage or whatever. But in the sense of, we feel when our feet are against the ground because there's a physical touch there. But our blood flowing, we don't normally know that our blood is flowing at all, right? Unless we are feeling for a pulse, or if we get really excited and we feel our heart pump. So there's these other little things that our brain is doing that we're not necessarily paying attention to, but it's a part of the perception of our bodies and environment that's not really different from sight and sound and taste.
We just carrying that a step further. if we spend 24 hours a day standing on our head and suddenly turned around and stood up, we'd have the same experience because we were now out of the normal.
Yeah, quite possibly.
It's what we're accustomed to, that our brain says, okay, this is what I expect of you.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad. Now, this is all kind of moving to a point. It's a real interesting one, and it's one that I've used in a lot of other contexts. But I really like it a lot, where he now moves the kind of sensation and how our brain is helping us to perceive reality. And he then mentions music. Like his wife can look at a score of music and know what it sounds like. Now, this is a marvelous, miraculous, and amazing gift that I think we almost never think about. This is one of those, like, you know, you need to be a freshman in college and like, whoa, like the hand, man, that's like so awesome. Like it's almost too basic to be in awe of, but it's still pretty amazing. Whether or not you can read music, now that just kind of takes it to another level. You can imagine music in your mind, a favorite song, the sound of an instrument. None of those things exist right now, except we can hear them.
Spoke about not only reading music, but about Beethoven, who was deaf,
Right.
could hear.
That's right. Now, and that's actually interesting for a slightly different reason. That in and of itself, because that's the mastery of Beethoven and his craft, that he could hear all of these interactions. That even if we could picture in the ears of our mind how that symphony ought to go, he was actually hearing all of the chords and all of the dissonance and all the interaction of the various specific instruments that without a lot of very specialized training, you know, most people could never distinguish. But there was a reason. So Beethoven early on was a pianist. Like that was, he performed as a child, kind of like Mozart on the piano or the pianoforte. As a matter of fact, Mozart actually met Beethoven once. Beethoven was a very young man, and he was playing piano. So Beethoven used to conduct, even in his deafness, by putting his head on the pianoforte and playing, and the vibrations were perceptible to him in stuff like keys and pitches and all these things that again, it's just amazing to consider. Now, we are able to imagine and almost construct these realities of these senses. Can you like close your eyes and remember a smell? Yeah, certain ones I can. Or a feel or a touch or a taste. And of course, it's not quite the real thing and it might be a little dull or whatever, but the abstraction of reality that our brains are able to not just compute and comprehend, but to do so effortlessly with such amazing speed, we don't even perceive that there's anything happening. I am vibrating vocal cords by expelling air through them. And you guys are not only hearing sounds, you are understanding my thoughts. Human speech it's just a bunch of vibrations. And yet, ideas in my head can now be put into your head because my vocal cords vibrate. That it's just human speech of any level is of wondrous and miraculous complexity.
I never thought about it, but he said the brain itself, the gray matter, doesn't feel, taste, smell.
That's right. All of these things exist within the workings of our brain, but I would say within the workings of our mind. You know, the brain itself, it's just interpreting these signals and sensations and everything else that it does not personally experience, in a sense. Remember when you were talking before about the brain surgery and how, I mean, oftentimes the patient is awake. So they can stimulate certain spots and get reactions from it. That's because it's not, it's not, you know, sensitive to touch in the way that other parts of our body are sensitive to touch. And between the skull and the cerebrospinal fluid and the dura mater and all this kind of stuff, the brain basically lives in its own extremely limited, very moderated environment. It doesn't get hot or cold. It doesn't get bumped or bruised. I mean, all these things, it's just kind of there. As a matter of fact, when it does get bumped and bruised, we call that a concussion, and it's pretty serious.
I like that he calls it the bony box.
The bony box, yeah, that's pretty good. So, you know, we're moving then towards, and even calls it this, the mystery of the person that I am. That these, you know, these chemical reactions, these firing of synapses in the nervous system, they are our experience of reality and of self. And that these nerves are the part of us that do not get replaced over the course of our lifetime. As we've read so many times in all these other chapters, how the body is constantly replacing, recycling, or renewing all of these cells. Well, except these. These are experiencing a lifetime of, well, life.
I was just sitting here thinking, the relationship between a human and his dog. The dog learns to respond to commands.
Yes.
And that's as far as his relationship, that's somewhat limited, but yet the total experience of man-dog relationship is much, much broader. The dog's faithfulness, for example, is an example of the brain reacting to that individual under any circumstance.
Protectiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just occurred to me that, but yet, and the dog can hear, has other senses that are more highly developed.
Sure.
Than ours.
They certainly smell.
Hearing.
Effectively than we do.
Yeah, hearing even.
Yeah. I think it was, you know, again, just to make everything about COVID, I think there was there were airports or something in Scandinavia or I don't know, someplace like that, but they were able to, they had dogs trained to smell COVID.
COVID, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was like, it was more accurate than some of the medical testing. And that's, I mean, I still can't, you know, you ever want to, you know, cook the noodles of your brain a little bit, start to imagine ways that these animals must perceive reality. You know, how does a dog, they must almost see smell, you know, like it's giving them inputs that they understand that I can't possibly fathom because that's not the way smell works for me. To get what it is and how far away and circumstances about it and, you know.
A good smell or not.
Well, yeah. And you know, it's you know, every dog likes to smell another dog's butt. but they're actually getting this like very specific and unique information that I can't even fathom. Like, how could you possibly know stuff? But anyway, it's even dogs, which we would classify sort of a lower life form, or less intelligent, or less capable intellectually or whatever. But understanding and knowing, even intuitively, stuff that we cannot really comprehend, or even we don't really understand how they understand it.
I'm pretty sure.
All right, so we now, he kind of takes a couple of theological turns here. One of them, as he is talking about the incarnation and the humility of God. And this was actually a pretty nice little thought that I'm not sure, pastor, theologian, and stuff. I've never seen the Dorothy Sayers quote, but that's kind of an interesting way to put it. The three humiliations of God, to lower himself through the incarnation, to have the limitations of human flesh, to suffer and die, especially in such a painful and ignominious way, and then to the humility, if not humiliation, of living through or presenting through the fallible institution of the church and its fallible people. I mean,
I thought that was an amazing thought. Never even considered that the church could be a source of humiliation for God.
Yeah, and I've talked about the kind of the wonder that God would choose to work through His world through broken people like us.
Right.
But when you kind of think of it in a more stark way, like the humiliation of God to be presented, to say, this is my body, and it's us. Like, ooh, that's the best you can do.
That's up too much.
Right.
In a way, I think that's a way bigger risk than the incarnation of the crucifixion. He had a certain amount of control over the first two because he chose them. Now, he chose us also, but then he also gave us free will. So we do all kinds of crazy things, and we don't always present Jesus in this world in a very positive, appealing, or true way.
Right. Yeah, and he gives a quick little list of the ways that Christians and the church as a whole have failed, or done it wrongly, or done it imperfectly. And that almost goes without saying. You kind of don't need to come up with much of a list to realize that if we're going to talk about the divine perfection of God Almighty and what is presented here on earth as the body of Christ is a bunch of people.
Dr. Brand said something, I'm not quoting it exactly, but he said he wondered why in the world God relies on humans.
Yeah, right.
Say that again, Dave.
Why in the world, Dr. Brand says, why in the world God would rely on humans?
Yeah.
And
pretty unreliable.
The risk of love.
Yeah.
Does he rely on us?
Well,
Really?
Present
He
him.
doesn't really need us.
He does.
so that, we can get into some kind of heavy theological and philosophical sledding on that one.
Yeah.
I would say within this context, the answer would be not rely in the sense of, well, I got to have this or else, and I have no other way, but because this is a choice. It's a purposeful decision to say the way that I will be presented and work through most of the world and to most people will be through fallible humanity. And it's not that God couldn't do it another way, but the choice is made. This is how it will be done. And there's obviously, that now it's up to us doing the right thing, which is a real kind of crapshoot.
Well, you know, God's pretty patient with us. And yeah, I was thinking here as the author compares the religious viewpoint of God with us versus our human existence. If I work for a boss, my boss keeps telling me things to do, and I don't do them or do them incompetently, I'm punished.
Yeah.
I'm fired. I'm demoted. I'm something. But God is very patient with us. We keep messing up. He doesn't fire us or demote us.
Right.
Maybe he does.
No, he doesn't. And
He has other ways of doing things, and when he gives us something to do and we don't do it, we miss the blessing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we're just
he gets it done through a different way.
Sure. Yeah, I think we could say, you know, God's goodwill is always accomplished, but the manner in which we remain involved in that now kind of comes to question. So this is he has this nice little nice little juxtaposition. You know, the agnostic saying, "Is God really there?" But the Christian having kind of a different, that's not too troubling. It's more like, why has God chosen such an indirect and hidden way of working on earth? Why rely so much on unreliable human beings? That's kind of the heaviness of the, you know, well, where is God? I mean, though any of us can have, you know, times of doubt, that's probably the more personally troubling question is, you know, not so much, you know, well, is he really there or not, but why do it in such a way that seems so difficult and fraught with peril? Wouldn't there be aren't there simpler ways? Aren't there more reliable ways?
No, you don't. It'll just go off. It'll just go. It'll just go off.
I'm just going to go, and I'm just going to go.
No.
You got something, Tom?
No, we're just digressing a little bit.
Oh.
God designed, that's the way he designed it. He wanted us to be like parts of the body of Christ.
Sure. Yeah.
And wanted us to be the ones that brought Christ to the world.
You know, a lot of this to me, I have to kind of liken to like parent-child experiences. I know it's not perfect, and I know not everybody relates in the same way, but for me, as I think through this stuff, it's almost like, you know, your kids are real small and you want them to do certain things and grow up in a certain way. And, you know, you train and you invest and you hope and plead and you punish and you encourage, all this sort of stuff. And it's never what you assumed, never. And sometimes it's harder and sometimes it's better, but it's never what you had in mind perfectly, because that's just not the way life works. And that's not the way people or children work or whatever. And to some degree, while that can be very hard to see hurt and disappointment and struggle and failure and everything else, it also makes success feel even better, maybe, because it's not like, well, you know, when you have a plan, a 10-step plan, it's very thorough and you work it out and it happens the way it's supposed to happen, you can feel satisfied. But when you work something and you've got a 10-step plan and it starts going awry by step 1 and it goes completely off the rails, and then something happens at the end that's different than what you expected, but it's just as good of an outcome or better, what you receive from that is kind of a different level of joy. And it's not just being satisfied that does stuff work the way it ought to work. The surprise element of it just feels all the sweeter and better.
okay, it didn't go the way I thought it was going to go when we were planning this in the first place, but God worked it out.
Yeah, right.
It's great.
That's my favorite concluding scripture sentence from morning prayer, from Ephesians. Glory to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine.
Yes.
God's goodwill is actually better than we imagine it is. And even when our plans are thwarted and we feel broken, his plan is actually even better than that. It doesn't mean in the short term we're going to like it more. But in an ultimate sense, it's going to be even better than what we were hoping for. Better than we can even conceive. All right, so we've got this risk of delegation. The talked about being ahead. Really enjoyed the, and again, this is almost kind of related to the parenthood thing from a moment ago. But when he talks about going to some of these other locations around the world and seeing other physicians that he doesn't know, using techniques he pioneered to help people in need, and how cool that must be. A few years ago, this is a little simple thing. It's a silly one, but a few years ago, my first martial arts instructor, who is since retired, and he's super accomplished, but Parkinson's finally put him in a place where he just couldn't train anymore, and he had retired and moved out of the country, and just life of leisure and all that. Well, I sent him some pictures of one of my students who then had moved away and started a program where he was training kids. And I'm like, these are your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and it was cool to feel like I was a part of this chain, where I passed along some things that I was taught, and now the guy I passed it along to was now passing it on to people that I had never met, and it really was kind of sweet. So that's something that I thought I was going to maybe get into, because this is sort of how some of this chapter struck me. One of the very consonant overlaps for me within Christian discipleship and martial arts training was always working, especially with adults, because they're more aware, more cognizant of this. But a lot of these moves and techniques and stuff early on, they have a hard time with. It feels very awkward. It feels weird. They have to think real hard about what they're doing. And I tell them, all this stuff feels wrong because it's unnatural. But the more you do it, your nature will change. And suddenly the things that felt very awkward, or you had to think real hard, or didn't feel right, or whatever, it starts to feel right. It starts to come more easily. It starts to become almost intuitive, like that just makes sense. And it's because your nature has been changed through the repetition, through the practice. It's been chipping away at you. And what was once a reflex has now been transformed into something else. And you have a new reflex. It's more thoughtful or more helpful or more useful or whatever it might be. You didn't have it before, but now you do, because your very nature has changed. And for me, that was so consistent with the concept of Christian discipleship, that God places a new nature within us in baptism, but the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit means it's not just a one moment, one time thing, but our natures, like our minds from Romans 12, are being renewed day by day. We're given a new nature on an ongoing basis through the sanctifying work of the Spirit. With Christ, we are not the same person we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And stuff that seemed real hard or awkward, or you had to think through very, very carefully, now comes almost without thinking, or it just seems obvious, or it feels natural because God has allowed our natures to change. Does that seem right to you? I very much.
Well, yes, if you do anything often enough, it becomes habit. Your body adapts to it.
Absolutely.
And early in this chapter, he talks about the musicians, the pianists.
Yeah, and then
it's amazing for me to listen to a soloist perform on the piano or some other instrument, doing an entire opus. There's not a note on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And yet this individual who practice does it automatically. Amazing.
But he says instinct is the key.
Sure.
Right.
And you know, some things they seem born with, like when he talks about the birds making the nest.
Yeah.
That level of instinct.
That was sweet.
Level of instinct that's coming from our nature that can be changed. His section at the end, which he calls repatterning, and basically talking about through practice, through repetition, you kind of rewire how things used to work into a new way. I would say that's the same thing with the piano player, the pianist, that, you know, their fingers operate differently than mine would because they've worked at it. And I'm sure for some people, there's just a level of natural giftedness or skill, or they're, you know, I think isn't it advantageous to have like long, thin fingers? It's just, it makes it easier, but still at some level, it's the time, it's the experience, it's the practice, it's the repetition, it's those habits, and it changes how things operate. It increases their capacity. That's another thing I tell my students, especially the kids, all the time. They're working on some technique. Do your best every single time, because when you do your best will get better. Your capacity to do that activity will only increase. The piano scales, which are, you know, kind of halting early on, and you have to think through, and you have to wait, is it this one or is it that one, and how hard, and which, you know, it becomes more natural. They go faster. You start improvising. All these sort of things happen as that nature is changed and those capacities increase. This was a new one on me, and it's in that repattering chapter, and I really like that. This one was cool and creepy at the same time, where he talked about taking some of the skin from the
yeah,
and putting it on the eyebrow.
Yes.
And when the fly on the eyebrow and they hit the top of it, like, oh, that's a little much for me. That's so.
Yeah.
I've never seen this one. I never realized that, like the tendon thing, that the nerves were differentiated at that level.
Yeah, I found that section very.
That was awesome. So, like, move your thumb. It didn't work. Okay, move your ring finger. Oh, wow. So I never considered that, but think about that for a moment. What they're doing, they're basically reprogramming their brain to switch internally ring finger for thumb.
Can that be done?
Apparently,
that example where the thumb and the finger commands and performance get mixed up. Can the brain retrain?
Apparently, no. I mean, he says that they eventually, after a lot of practice, they get used to it. I will say, I think that's kind of the hallmark treatment in brain injury or stroke victims. Those normal pathways might be impeded or gone.
Mm-hmm.
you are relearning how to do things, whether it's speech or writing or even walking. You're creating new pathways because the old pathway that was so automatic to you is no longer accessible. It must work because, I mean, we've seen it work. I just don't understand it.
Yeah.
So we end off on something that I'm also quite fond of. He talks about the conscience, or even the subconscious, referring to it as a law written on our hearts. And to me, that's extremely Pauline. That's the first 3 chapters of the book of Romans, is basically, even if you don't have the law of Moses, God built the universe to reflect his natural law inside of you and inside of every human culture somehow. Your own conscience acts like the law, and you violated that at some point. Everybody has. And it's a very practical thing that he mentions, but it has very, very deep philosophical and theological implications. When the crucial moment of choice arrives, I often have little time for conscious reflection. All that has gone before enters into that moment. So how does that strike you?
I want to go
You've been training to make the right decision.
Yeah, if you violate something that your conscience says is what should be done, you're uncomfortable. That violation creates an uncomfortable feeling. I know it's wrong.
Yes.
Can I take the other side of it?
Go ahead.
Where he said God would imprint instructions into me as if they were put there genetically, I ask for an uninterrupted flow of message from the head and for a response of faithful obedience.
Yes.
I think when you, particularly when you want to listen to it, and he's telling you what to do.
Yes.
He can do that just all the time.
Sure. There's definitely an element of our personal desire to be connected and stay connected. I would even underscore that to say, the more you choose and focus on listening, the more you will hear.
Yes.
So here's a more, kind of human analog. My kids don't listen to any classical music as much as I've tried. They just, in one ear and out the other. I can put on a piece for them and they hear the very broadest of strokes. I can listen to that same piece, which is very familiar to me, and I hear nuance. I hear what different instruments are doing. I can perceive the leitmotif that's being threaded together with something that's already happened, and I know what's going to happen next. And I can imagine, because some of these pieces I've played personally, and I can kind of see. And so there's all this stuff that has nothing to do with our ears.
Right.
And it has everything to do with, I've spent a lifetime listening to that stuff, and I hear more than they do.
That's right.
I hear, but they can't perceive it. But if they were to spend a lifetime listening, they would perceive it as well. Mm-hmm. It's all there. But your ability to hear takes practice.
But they're exposed every day to more popular music. They have that constant exposure. So sure that's what they can appreciate. Whereas the classic music, they haven't had daily exposure.
And the opposite,
they don't appreciate it.
The opposite happens. We listen to their music,
right,
and have a hard time perceiving what is quality in there.
But they get it. Yeah, sure. And so again, listening to the voice of God, and he very beautifully with his life of discipleship. that obedience, that practice, that discipline makes a difference. I mean, he even references the Book of Common Prayer.
Yes.
That these disciplines shape us. I would say that new nature that we're given, it's a part of that discipling process. It's not just sitting there and letting God work in us as we're sort of passively waiting, but when it's a daily part of our lives, that shaping happens in very regular and deep and profound ways, and you keep doing your best, and your best gets better. You keep trying to listen, you're able to hear more.
That brings me to Daniel. Remember, Daniel had purpose in his heart that he would not eat. So when it was time for it, and they said, you got to do this, he had already knew in his heart that he wasn't going to do it.
Yes.
Can you reiterate that?
She's talking about Daniel and the purpose of his heart. He knew what he wasn't going to do. He knew that he wasn't going to eat. And then when the opportunity, the time came, he was already prepared.
Good analogy.
This is a philosophical perspective that I have a very deep and lasting affinity for. And it's one of the things that I truly love in Aquinas. So this concept is why I'm kind of a Thomist, in that he sort of danced around the edges for it. And I like to jump right at it. And I tell the martial arts kids this, but this is something I've preached in countless sermons. You play like you practice. In the moral questions of life, we rarely come up to something and deal with it in a complete vacuum. Like a question comes up, and like as a blank slate, we start weighing the pros and the cons. Instead, the moments of great decision for us about a moral question, we have been shaping our minds for all our lives in little questions, in little decisions. The person who, steals paper clips from the office, when they're faced with a moral quandary about cheating on their taxes, has been training themselves to see the world and to see the moral issue in a particular way. You follow? And when we are, maybe scrupulous about honesty and very little things, when a big moral question comes up, it's just not even in question about whether we're going to tell the truth or not, because that's just what you do. So we play like we practice when whether it's the martial art kids or maybe somebody playing a sport, when they're kind of lackadaisical or sloppy during the week in practice, what makes you think you're going to get to the game and suddenly you're going to be great at it? You've been training your body and you've been training your mind to be sloppy and slow and lackadaisical. Maybe when the time comes in a game and it counts, it's going to all work out perfectly. But to me, that would be a coincidence.
Good luck.
I agree.
In a sort of a metaphysical way, we are granted the grace to make a decision for Christ, to follow him as a disciple, to receive his love, to take the sacraments, to live our lives in a particular way, to make a public proclamation or whatever. Again, a Thomist would maybe suggest perhaps all of these things that we are given the grace to do in our mortal lives are the preparation for the final exam. To see Jesus face to face. And anyone can hear that and think, okay, well, I'm going to, well, I'm an atheist and I'm going to turn away, or that person, they're going to, well, what if it really is a reflex at that point? You're going to see the face of Jesus, and perhaps there is no conscious thought in the sense of all your life you've been preparing for this moment, whether you realized it or not. to have made the public proclamation, to have received the sacraments, to have been his disciple, to walk with him, we won't even have to think. We will see the face of Jesus and we will be transformed into his likeness. Or is it we have been training ourselves all of our lives to either not see it or to look away?
Yeah.
Wonder to be not sure.
And that is where this concept of we really can't be in conscious, deliberate decision-making thought about everything that happens to us. We couldn't do it. We would spend all day long, you know, thinking about the simplest of tasks and never moving forward because there's so much to consider and ponder about even the smallest of decisions. So much of it, we have to be kind of on autopilot. So much of it is habit. But all that comes from somewhere. The ability to not think about every tiny decision, the ability to have the habits that shape so much of our lives that we don't even think about it. Those habits come from somewhere. And every now and again, it is worth reviewing. What habits have we established for ourselves? And are those the ones we truly want? It might take some practice. It might take being deliberate about it and a lot of repetition, but our natures can change. And perhaps what we ought to be sort of relying on and not thinking about can be different than it is currently, so that what we are practicing, even when we don't realize it, on a day-by-day, a moment-by-moment basis, is preparing us that in the big moments, or perhaps the biggest of moments, our reflex will reveal the nature that we actually desire to have. What else?
Nope.
We good?
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah, that was quite a chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Good discussion.
it was a little different. You know, we had, it was a little less on the personal story side, but boy, there were some really cool things in there.
Yep.
He is not going gentle into that good night. He's going to take us to the finish line, I think, with a lot of good stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, so we will take next week off. Holy Week, the Wednesday of Holy Week, we will do chapter 21. We will take Easter week off. And then the week after that, we should be able to hit our final 2 chapters in a row.
Okay.
All right, good?
Good.
Yeah.
All right,
Good.
well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.